Welcome back to Crowned Black Heroes, where we uncover the scientific geniuses who changed the world but were deliberately erased from history. Today I'm going to tell you about a man whose chemical innovations have touched the lives of over 1 billion people. His synthesis of cortisone made it possible to treat rheumatoid arthritis and inflammatory diseases, saving millions from crippling pain and disability. His work on synthetic hormones made birth control pills possible, giving women control over their reproductive lives. His fire-extinguishing foam saved thousands of sailors burning to death on ships during World War II. He held over 130 patents and was one of the greatest chemists of the 20th century. But he couldn't get a job at major universities because he was black. Chemical companies told him they didn't know he was Negro when they offered him positions, then rescinded the offers. His house was firebombed twice by white supremacists who didn't want a black family in their neighborhood. And for decades after his death, chemistry textbooks barely mentioned his name. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because we expose the truth that science textbooks hide. And if this story makes you angry that you never learned about Dr. Percy Julian in school, smash that like button and drop a comment. Now let me tell you about the chemist who synthesized miracles but couldn't escape racism. Percy Julian. Julian is born on April 11, 1899 in Montgomery, Alabama. Montgomery is the heart of the Jim Crow South, where everything is segregated and black people face constant discrimination and violence. Percy's grandparents were enslaved. His parents, James and Elizabeth Julian, are among the first generation born into freedom. James works as a railway mail clerk. Elizabeth is a teacher. They have 6 children, and Percy is the eldest. The Julian family is determined that all their children will be educated despite the enormous obstacles. Education is seen as the path to opportunity, to dignity, to proving black capability in a society that assumes black inferiority. Percy attends segregated schools through 8th grade, which is as far as public education for black children goes in Montgomery. There is no public high school for black students. None. If Percy wants to continue his education, he has to find another way. Percy is accepted to State Normal School for Negroes in Montgomery, but he has to start in a preparatory program because the segregated elementary schools he attended didn't provide adequate preparation for college-level work. This isn't Percy's fault. It's the deliberate result of underfunded, inferior segregated schools designed to limit black achievement. Percy works incredibly hard, studying late into the night, catching up on years of inadequate education, excelling despite the obstacles. In 1916, at age 17, Percy is accepted to DePaul University in Indiana, a predominantly white institution. This is extraordinary for a black student from Alabama, but DePaul doesn't make it easy. Percy isn't allowed to live in the dormitories. He has to find housing off campus with a black family. He works as a waiter in a fraternity house to pay his tuition, serving meals to white students who often treat him with contempt. He experiences racism constantly, is excluded from social activities, faces discrimination from some professors and students. But Percy is brilliant, especially in chemistry. He becomes fascinated by organic chemistry, the chemistry of carbon compounds that are the basis of all life. The complexity, the elegance, the power to synthesize new molecules captivates him. Percy pours himself into his studies, spending endless hours in the laboratory, learning everything he can about chemical synthesis. Percy graduates from DePaul in 1920 as valedictorian, the top student in his entire class. He's proven his brilliance beyond any doubt. Now he wants to pursue graduate studies, to get a PhD in chemistry, to become a research scientist pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. Percy applies to graduate schools, hoping for acceptance to study chemistry at the doctoral level. Every single major university rejects him, not because of his grades or his abilities. Those are exceptional. They reject him because he's Negro. White universities in the 1920s don't want black. graduate students, especially not in the sciences. Science is considered the domain of white men, and black students are seen as intellectually inferior and unworthy of advanced scientific training. Percy is devastated but refuses to give up. He accepts a position teaching chemistry at Fisk University, a historically black university in Nashville, Tennessee. Percy teaches there for 2 years, and he's a good teacher, but he's frustrated. He wants to do research, to discover new things, to contribute to scientific knowledge, not just teach basic chemistry to undergraduates. In 1922, Percy manages to get accepted to Harvard University for graduate studies. At Harvard, Percy again excels, earning his master's degree in chemistry. His research is impressive. His professors recognize his talent. But when Percy wants to continue for a PhD, Harvard refuses. They say they can't have a Negro teaching undergraduate laboratory sections, which PhD students are required to do as part of their training. The idea of white undergraduate students being taught by a black graduate student is unacceptable to Harvard's administration. Percy is again denied opportunity because of his race. This is Harvard, supposedly one of the greatest universities in the world, and they're rejecting a brilliant student purely because of the color of his skin. Percy doesn't know what to do. Every door seems closed. American universities won't give him the opportunities he deserves. Then, Percy learns about opportunities to study in Europe where racial attitudes, while not perfect, are somewhat less rigid than in America. In 1929, Percy travels to Vienna, Austria, to pursue his PhD at the University of Vienna. In Vienna, Percy studies under Ernst Speth, a renowned chemist specializing in the chemistry of natural products. Percy flourishes in Vienna. He's finally in an environment where he's judged primarily on his scientific abilities rather than his race. He works intensely, conducting research on synthesizing chemicals found in plants. Percy earns his PhD in chemistry in 1931 with a dissertation on the total synthesis of physostigmine, a complex alkaloid used medically. This is cutting-edge organic chemistry, the kind of work that establishes scientific reputations. Percy returns to the United States in 1932 with a PhD in chemistry from the University of Vienna, published research in prestigious journals, and high hopes for an academic career. Surely now, with a European PhD and demonstrated excellence, he'll be able to get a faculty position at a major university. Percy applies for positions at universities across America. Every single one rejects him. The reason is always the same, stated explicitly or implicitly. He's Negro. White universities will not hire a black professor, especially not in chemistry, regardless of his qualifications. Percy's alma mater, DePaul University, finally offers him a position as a research fellow and instructor. It's not a tenure-track position, but it's an opportunity to do research. Percy accepts and begins working on synthesizing physostigmine, the compound he studied for his dissertation. In 1935, Percy achieves something remarkable. He successfully synthesizes physostigmine, a drug used to treat glaucoma and other conditions. This is the first total synthesis of this incredibly complex molecule, a major achievement in organic chemistry. Percy's work is published in the Journal of the American Chemical Society, the most prestigious chemistry journal in the country. The synthesis of physostigmine puts Percy on the map as one of the leading organic chemists in America. But in 1936, despite this achievement, DePaul refuses to promote Percy to a full professor position. The unofficial reason that everyone understands is that white students and their parents are uncomfortable with a black professor teaching white students. Percy is, once again, reminded that no matter how brilliant his work, no matter how significant his achievements, his race will be used to limit his opportunities. Percy leaves DePaul, frustrated and angry but still determined. He eventually finds a position at Glidden Company, a paint and chemical manufacturer in Chicago. Glidden hires Percy to direct their research on using soybeans, which are abundant and cheap, to create useful chemical products. This seems like a step down from cutting-edge academics. research, but Percy sees opportunity. If he can't advance in academia because of racism, he'll make his mark in industrial chemistry. At Glidden, Percy begins revolutionary work synthesizing hormones and other valuable chemicals from soybean oil. In the early 1940s, hormones like progesterone, testosterone, and cortisone are known to be medically important, but they're incredibly expensive to produce. They're extracted from animal glands in tiny quantities at enormous cost, making them accessible only to the very wealthy. Percy figures out how to synthesize these hormones from soybean sterols cheaply and in large quantities. In 1940, Percy develops a method to synthesize progesterone from soybean oil. Progesterone is essential for pregnancy, is used to prevent miscarriages, and will later become a key component of birth control pills. Percy's synthesis makes progesterone affordable and widely available for the first time. This is medical chemistry that will eventually affect hundreds of millions of women worldwide. During World War II, Percy is approached by the U.S. Navy with an urgent problem. Navy ships are being attacked and catching fire. Sailors are dying horrible deaths, burning in oil and gasoline fires on the water. Standard fire extinguishers don't work well on these fires. Percy creates a solution, a soy-based protein foam called aerofoam that can smother oil and gasoline fires. This foam is deployed on Navy ships and saves thousands of sailors' lives during the war. After the war, Percy continues his hormone synthesis work at Glidden. His greatest achievement comes in the late 1940s when he develops a method to synthesize cortisone from soybean sterols. Cortisone is a hormone with remarkable anti-inflammatory properties. In 1949, doctors discover that cortisone can treat rheumatoid arthritis, a crippling disease that causes severe joint pain and disability. Before Percy's synthesis, cortisone is extracted from animal adrenal glands and costs several $100s per gram, making it accessible only to the extremely wealthy. Percy's synthesis using soybeans makes cortisone available at a tiny fraction of the cost, eventually just pennies per dose. This transforms medicine. Millions of people suffering from rheumatoid arthritis and other inflammatory diseases can now be treated. The impact is impossible to overstate. Cortisone and related steroid drugs become among the most important medications in all of medicine, used to treat arthritis, asthma, lupus, inflammatory bowel disease, and countless other conditions. Percy's synthesis method is the foundation of the entire modern steroid pharmaceutical industry. His work has directly improved or saved hundreds of millions of lives. By the early 1950s, Percy Julian is one of the most accomplished chemists in America. He holds over 100 patents. His innovations have generated hundreds of millions of dollars for Glidden and for the pharmaceutical industry. He's elected to the American Institute of Chemists. He's invited to speak at scientific conferences. Within the chemistry community, Percy is recognized as brilliant, but he still faces racism in his personal life. In 1950, Percy and his wife Anna buy a house in Oak Park, Illinois, an affluent white suburb of Chicago. The white residents of Oak Park are furious that a black family is moving into their neighborhood. They organize meetings to try to prevent the sale. When that fails, they resort to violence. On Thanksgiving Day, 1950, while Percy's family is in the house, someone throws a firebomb through the window. The house catches fire. Fortunately, Percy and his family escape without serious injury. The police investigate, but no one is arrested. 2 months later, in February 1951, Percy's house is attacked again with dynamite. Again, Percy's family survives. Again, no one is held accountable. These are terrorist attacks, attempts to murder Percy and his family, or at least to terrorize them into leaving. But Percy refuses to be intimidated. He moves his family into the house and stays in Oak Park. This is courage beyond his scientific work, refusing to be driven out by racist violence. Percy increases security around his house and continues his research. By the mid-1950s, Percy has accomplished everything he can at Glidden. He wants independence, wants to build his own company. 1954. Percy leaves Glidden and founds Julian Laboratories, his own chemical company. Julian Laboratories synthesizes hormones and other pharmaceutical intermediates, the chemical building blocks that pharmaceutical companies use to make drugs. Percy's company is enormously successful. He becomes wealthy, a self-made black millionaire in an era when that's extraordinarily rare. Percy uses his wealth and his platform to support civil rights causes. He donates to organizations fighting for racial equality. He speaks out against discrimination in science and academia. He mentors young black scientists, trying to create the opportunities for them that he was denied. In 1961, Percy sells Julian Laboratories to SmithKline and French for over $2 million. He's achieved financial success beyond what most scientists ever attain. But money was never Percy's primary goal. What he wanted was to do great science, to contribute to human knowledge and welfare, to prove that a black scientist could achieve at the highest levels. And he succeeded spectacularly, despite every obstacle racism placed in his path. Percy continues working as a consultant and researcher until his health declines in the early 1970s. Dr. Percy Lavon Julian dies on April 19, 1975, at age 76. His funeral is attended by family, friends, fellow scientists, and people from the civil rights movement who recognized Percy as someone who broke barriers and paved the way for others. But even at his death, Percy is not widely known outside the scientific community. The general public doesn't know his name. Chemistry textbooks mention his synthesis of physostigmine and cortisone, but often without adequate context about his race or the obstacles he overcame. It's not until years after his death that efforts begin to properly recognize Percy's achievements and tell his full story. In 1990, Percy is inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. In 1993, the American Chemical Society designates Percy's home and laboratory as a National Historic Chemical Landmark. Schools and buildings are named after him. His story is included in some chemistry curricula. But even now, Percy Julian is not a household name. Ask random people to name famous scientists, and they'll say Einstein, Curie, Edison, Newton. Almost no one will say Percy Julian, despite the fact that his work has directly affected far more lives than most famous scientists. Why does Percy Julian's story matter today? First, it demonstrates the extraordinary waste of human potential that racism causes. Percy was a genius who could have done even more if he'd had the opportunities and support that white scientists took for granted. How many breakthroughs didn't happen because Percy was denied positions at major universities where he could have trained graduate students and led research teams? How many other black scientists with similar potential never got any opportunities at all because racism blocked them at every step? Second, Percy's story reveals the persistence of racism even in fields that claim to be objective and meritocratic. Science is supposed to be about evidence, about rigorous testing, about valuing ideas based on their merit. Yet Percy faced discrimination throughout his career. Universities rejected him despite his brilliance. His achievements were minimized or erased from history. The scientific community failed to live up to its own stated ideals. Third, Percy's synthesis of cortisone and other hormones is one of the great scientific achievements of the 20th century, but it's presented in textbooks as if it happened in a vacuum, without acknowledging that the scientist who achieved it did so while facing discrimination that would have destroyed most people. When we teach science history without this context, we're lying to students about how science actually works, about who gets opportunities, about whose contributions get recognized. Before I close, I want you to understand something. Percy Julian didn't just synthesize cortisone. He synthesized hope for millions of people suffering from arthritis and inflammatory diseases. He didn't just create birth control hormone precursors. He created reproductive freedom for women worldwide. He didn't just invent firefighting foam. He saved thousands of sailors from burning to death. His work touches your life even if you've never heard his name. If you or anyone you know has taken cortisone or prednisone or any steroid medication, that's Percy Julian's legacy. If you or anyone you know uses hormonal birth control, that's built on Percy Julian's chemistry. The man who made these miracles possible was born to the grandchildren of slaves, was denied opportunities at every turn because of racism, had his house firebombed because he dared to live in a white neighborhood, and died largely unknown to the public. That's not just Percy's tragedy. That's America's tragedy. Our collective failure to honor the people who make our lives better. Our persistent habit of erasing black excellence from history. Percy Julian deserves to be remembered alongside Einstein and Curie and Edison. His contributions to chemistry and medicine are that significant. If this story moved you, if it made you angry that you never learned about Percy Julian in school, if it made you want to honor his legacy properly, then act now. Hit that like button. Subscribe to Crowned Black Heroes and turn notifications on. Drop a comment telling me if you knew about Dr. Percy Julian before this video. Share this video everywhere, especially with anyone interested in science or medicine. Make sure Percy Julian's name is known. Make sure when people talk about great chemists, about great scientists, about people who changed medicine, Percy Julian is included. Thank you for watching. Thank you for honoring Percy Julian's memory. His cortisone synthesis alone has improved hundreds of millions of lives. His work on hormones made modern reproductive medicine possible. He was a genius who persisted despite racism that would have destroyed most people. Share his story. Demand that science education include the full truth about scientific history, including the racism that Percy and other black scientists faced. And join me next time for another story of black excellence that history tried to hide. Until then, stay committed to truth and justice. Peace.